My dear ones, today we're going to hear the story of Clara Mendoza. Have you ever heard something from your family that made you deeply sad? Leave your answers in the comments. In my 70 years of life, I've heard many things, and so has Clara, a woman who was silenced by the very people she should have trusted the most. But what did they do to her? Get your heart ready. Because this isn't just a story about pain. It's a story about courage, dignity, and rebirth. And if you're not yet subscribed to Grandma's channel, do it right now. Every week I bring stories that touch the soul and reignite hope. Now, come with me and find out what Clara did when everyone thought she had no strength left.
The comforting aroma of a home-cooked stew permeated the Santa Fe kitchen, where the gentle hum of the oven seemed the only sound to break the tense silence of the room. Clara Mendoza, 76 years old, a diminutive figure stooped by time, watched her family dining at the table. Cutlery clinked against porcelain, a monotonous rhythm that, to her, sounded like a countdown. Her eyes, once filled with a gentle sparkle, now held a subdued melancholy, almost imperceptible to anyone who didn't know her intimately. The house, once a sanctuary of memories with her late husband, had now become the stage for a peculiar sensation for Clara, where she increasingly felt like an unwelcome guest. Marcos, her son, chewed in silence, his gaze fixed upon his plate. Beside him, Vivian, his wife, offered a strained smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Clara's devotion to this home, to every meal prepared, every garment folded, every vase of flowers watered, seemed to dissipate into the thin air of the dining room. She had dedicated years, decades, to nurturing this nest, ensuring there was always warmth and sustenance, that laughter echoed through the halls, that it was the happy residence she had always yearned for and dreamed of throughout her life. But, with time, the laughter and joy within that place had dwindled, replaced by an atmosphere of chill and detachment. The security she felt within those rooms, within this house where she had always lived and which was built upon foundations of love and sacrifice, now revealed itself to be a fragile illusion, on the verge of collapse. Then, she heard a sentence, spoken with the casualness of a sigh, but which struck Clara like a chilling blow to the chest, like a stab to her heart. Vivian, her daughter-in-law, without averting her gaze from her plate, in a voice barely rising above the clinking, uttered the words that tore through the veil of her routine. "You eat, but you don't help." Clara felt a knot tighten in her throat. The food on her plate suddenly became tasteless, like sand. Her eyes sought out her son Marcos's, a silent plea for a sign, a word of defense, a recognition of her worth. But her son remained silent, his posture rigid, his inertia a response as cruel as Vivian's words. The absence of the voice of the one she expected to defend her from that attack, the weight of his indifference, was an abyss opening beneath Clara's feet. In that instant, the house, which had been her refuge, transformed into an invisible prison, each wall echoing the feeling of being a burden. The humiliation was a slow poison, spreading through her veins, corroding her dignity. But amidst the pain and hurt that Clara felt, a spark of something new, something ancient and forgotten, ignited within her, the flame of her own will. This was no longer her place. This was no longer her home, not truly. The decision, though agonizing, sprang from an unexpected clarity. There would be no shouting, no arguments, no overt tears. That moment of contempt, the indifference of her son, was the push she needed to see the stark, unvarnished truth of her situation. The life she knew, the routine that defined her, had reached its end, and she had to face it. That night, cloaked in the darkness, with everyone inside the house submerged in the heavy slumber of indifference, Clara moved with silent precision. Her steps were light, almost spectral, as she traversed the familiar corridors, now rendered alien. It did not take long. An old suitcase, its wheels groaning with a near imperceptible whisper. Inside, a few garments, scant material mementos. In her gnarled hands, she carried a rosary of dark wood, the beads smooth and worn by years of devotion, and a time-worn notebook, its pages yellowed and filled with fine script, forgotten thoughts, and recipes. These were the sole vestiges that still held echoes of her past, of the woman she had been before being defined by others. The act of leaving was not an escape, but a quiet rebirth, an act of profound fortitude. The door closed behind her with a soft click, sealing not merely the end of an era, but the commencement of an uncharted journey, propelled by the pursuit of something more profound than shelter, the rediscovery of herself. Clara, now adrift in a world that had suddenly become vast and indifferent, felt the weight of solitude press down in a small room where she had settled. The nights were long and cold, each strange noise a vivid reminder of her newfound vulnerability. The days, in turn, dragged on, filled with a mixture of physical exhaustion and deep inner turmoil. She found herself in a rented room, small and impersonal, where the walls seemed to echo the silence of her own mind. This new reality, so devoid of the familiarity she had known in her previous life, demanded a painful adjustment, forcing her to confront the fragility of her own existence. The decades-old routine, centered on caring and providing, had unraveled, leaving behind a void that seemed insurmountable. Despite the courage that propelled her out of that door, a shadow of doubt began to creep into her heart. Moments of hesitation arose, whispering questions. Had she acted impulsively? Would she be condemning herself to an even lonelier old age, far from everything she once considered hers? The illusory comfort of dependency, however painful, sometimes seemed less daunting than the vast and uncertain territory of autonomy. This internal battle, between the burning desire for freedom and the paralyzing fear of the unknown, was a trial as arduous as any physical challenge. Her resilience, forged in years of silent sacrifice, was now tested in its deepest essence, revealing not only her strength but also the fragility inherent in the human condition. Amidst this tempest of emotions, a recollection surfaced, a thread of hope tangled in the webs of memory. Alejandro Ruiz. The name drifted through her mind like a distant beacon. He had been a loyal friend to her husband, a man of law, but also of profound wisdom and integrity. The notion of seeking him out arose not as an immediate solution, but as an impulse, the final bridge to a past that perhaps still held some key to the future. It was not an escape, but a hesitant step towards a possible reorientation. She knew his help would not resolve all her afflictions, but perhaps it could offer a compass on her aimless journey. With a renewed determination, Clara located Alejandro's old office. The place hadn't changed much since her days of frequenting it. The scent of aged books and coffee still permeated the air, evoking a sense of almost forgotten familiarity. Upon seeing him, the intervening years seemed to vanish. Alejandro, with his tranquil aura and discerning gaze, listened to her with an attentiveness she hadn't received in a long time. There was no judgment, only a genuine listening that, in itself, was a balm to her wounded soul. He didn't offer ready-made solutions, but rather a space where she could speak, vent, and recount everything she had been enduring recently. It was during this conversation that Alejandro, with the delicacy of someone guarding a precious secret, revealed something that would irreversibly alter the course of Clara's life. He mentioned a document, a testament of love and foresight from her late husband, which had secured for her a stability she was unaware of. The house, the very one she had just left, did not belong to her relatives. Since 1993, through a meticulously planned clause, the property had legally been in her name. The news hit her like a wave, a mixture of shock and a peculiar joy. It was a posthumous act of love, an anchor cast in time to ensure she would never be left destitute. This revelation not only provided Clara with a vital tool for her autonomy, but also reframed the memory of her husband, transforming the pain of loss into a legacy of protection and care that transcended death. Clara was overjoyed by her husband's demonstration of love, even after his passing. The newly revealed truth about the house's ownership was not merely information. It was a seed sown in fertile ground, germinating a long-dormant resolve within Clara's heart. Suddenly, she possessed crystal clarity regarding the path forward. This was not about petty vengeance but a reclamation of her own identity, crushed beneath the weight of indifference. The house, once a symbol of her sacrifice and more recently of her invisibility, transformed into a tool, a means to redefine her own worth and forge a future where she would be not a burden, but a force. Her mind, previously wounded, now envisioned a horizon of possibilities, an act of profound self-liberation. With a serene determination, Clara commenced the proceedings. Discretion was her most potent ally. Each step was taken with calculated calm, a stark contrast to the internal turmoil that had consumed her for so long. She contacted the appropriate channels, acting with an efficiency that would surprise all who saw her merely as a fragile lady. The documents were prepared, signatures obtained. The sale of that property, so laden with memories, unfolded with a fluidity and tranquility she hadn't imagined. No one noticed the threads she was silently weaving behind the scenes, the invisible web slowly tightening around the life Marcos and Vivian considered a certainty. It was a chess move, a precise maneuver by someone who had learned to distrust appearances. Then the impact. Days later, a legal notice arrived at the house, an envelope that carried with it the weight of an impending storm. Marcos and Vivian, accustomed to leading comfortable and tranquil lives, were confronted with brutal reality. The house, the foundation of their security, had been sold. The shock was immense, a blow that left them stunned. The presumption of possession, the unquestionable right they believed they had over the space and over Clara herself, crumbled in an instant. That piece of paper was not merely an eviction notice. It was the materialization of Clara's autonomy, an inescapable reminder that the woman they had disregarded possessed a strength and capacity for action they had never imagined. It was a complete role reversal. For Clara, already settled into a new, modest abode, a temporary respite, a safe harbor for the ensuing chapter, the news of their reaction arrived devoid of any hint of triumph or bitterness. There was no satisfaction to be found in her son and his family's distress, only the quiet affirmation that her decision, though drastic, had been indispensable. She had crossed an irreversible threshold, not merely out of that house, but out of a life of subjugation. That act of sale was not an end in itself, but a means to a more profound purpose, a fresh start she was already beginning to envision. Her serenity served as testament that liberation lay not in retribution, but in the arduous task of self-reconstruction, far from the lingering shadows of her past. The sale of the house was far more than a simple real estate transaction. It became a watershed moment. This was true not only for Clara, who reclaimed her dignity and her right to an autonomous future, but also for Marcos and Vivian, compelled to confront the repercussions of their own neglect and ingratitude. What appeared to be a punishment was, in reality, a stark lesson on the intrinsic value of human relationships and the steep price of disregard. The house, once a theater of disrespect, now functioned as a catalyst for a new era, both for Clara on her journey of rediscovery and for those left behind, faced with the void left by her departure. The seed of a new existence had been sown, and its nascent roots were already beginning to deepen. For Marcos and Vivian, life had fractured into pieces, shattering with the same alacrity that had once seemed its unassailable strength. The supposed bedrock of financial and social security, so solid beneath their feet until recently, had been yanked away with brutal swiftness, exposing a chasm of uncertainty. Their quest for a new roof over their heads had devolved into a humbling odyssey, punctuated by slammed doors and dismissive glances. Each thwarted attempt to secure rental housing, each frigid rejection, served as a stark memento of their precarious standing. What had once been mundane routine had transformed into a daily struggle for survival, a relentless clash against a reality that stubbornly refused to yield. Even more desolating, the union of Marcos and Vivian, which seemed robust beneath the veneer of prosperity, began to fracture under the weight of adversity. Vivian, accustomed to a comfortable lifestyle, soon revealed the superficiality of her attachments. Her words, once mere echoes of disdain, now transformed into sharp barbs, directed at Marcos with escalating ferocity. The backdrop of their collapse was not confined to the absence of a home. It was the disintegration of a relationship, the loss of a pillar he had naively considered unassailable. This deterioration of their marriage, evident in every acrimonious argument and every charged silence, was a testament that true wealth resided not in material possessions, but in the fortitude of character and mutual loyalty. In contrast, Clara, a silent observer of the vortex that had swallowed her former occupants, navigated a new set of challenges. The nursing home, while secure, presented its own testing ground. She found herself surrounded by unfamiliar faces, each carrying its own narrative of abandonment and resilience. Dona Zulema, with her vivid eyes and hands perpetually engaged in knitting. SCU Orlando, a former history teacher with a penchant for puzzles. And the taciturn Beatriz, whose gaze held the depth of uncharted seas. These individuals, each in their own way, served as mirrors to her own journey, inviting her to reach out, transcend isolation, and forge new connections. Life in the nursing home necessitated a novel form of surrender, an overcoming of the innate reticence she had nurtured over the years. Small gestures, such as sharing a cup of tea or a subtle smile, became meaningful acts of connection. The fragility of her own circumstances, mirrored in those around her, compelled her to confront the inherent need for communal living. She realized that the true test was not merely to endure, but to flourish in an environment that, while initially alien, offered the promise of belonging. The acceptance of her own vulnerabilities allowed her to perceive strength in others, and vice versa. As Marcos sank deeper into escalating despair, bearing the weight of Vivian's abandonment and the humiliation of his new circumstances, Clara was solidifying her own existence. He found himself on the precipice of a profound abyss of self-deception, compelled to confront the truth about his choices and the inertia that had allowed his mother's suffering. With each passing day, reality imposed its lessons with relentless cruelty. What seemed to be an external punishment was, in fact, a brutal invitation to introspection, an opportunity, however agonizing, to reevaluate his deepest values. He was being tested on his capacity to acknowledge error, to confront his own failings, unshielded by his usual excuses. Beyond the surface of mere material loss, Marcos's predicament presented a complex moral dilemma. He found himself not only stripped of his material possessions but also losing his very identity, an identity constructed upon the illusion of control and superiority. The necessity of rebuilding his life compelled him to consider paths he had previously disdained, to ask for help, to swallow his pride. His trajectory, once one of ascent, was now one of descent, an abrupt fall that forced him to question everything he believed to be true. The tension escalated, not merely in his external life, but in the battle waged within his own soul. The sheer weight of his disillusionment had become an unbearable burden upon Marcos's shoulders. With each passing day, reality shed its disguises, exposing the stark rawness of his choices. Stripped of the material foundation that had underpinned his self-perception and, more painfully, devoid of Vivian's presence, he found himself confronted by an overwhelming expanse of emptiness. His mind, once brimming with ambitions and expediencies, now reverberated with the whispers of belated regret. With every step through the city, every glance from former acquaintances, he felt the sting of humiliation, a wound that refused to heal. Amidst this personal ruin, a singular certainty began to coalesce from the chaos: the urgent necessity of settling accounts with his mother. The image of his mother, the silent woman he had allowed to be wounded, haunted his thoughts. It was an inescapable summons, a journey not of returning to what was, but of confronting what he had become. This quest, which unfolded as a descent into a dark cavern of the soul, was the only path he envisioned toward any vestige of peace. The decision to seek her out was not an easy choice, but an imposition of his own conscience, an act of moral desperation. Concurrently, Within her novel surroundings, Clara eschewed complacency. Far from being satisfied with modest security, a more grandiose vision was burgeoning in her mind. Financial resources, once a mere source of autonomy, now served as the catalyst for a transformative purpose. She observed her new companions, Dona Zulema, whose wisdom was intricately woven into every crochet stitch, Seu Orlando, who found order amidst the chaos of puzzles, and Beatriz, whose profound serenity exuded a contagious calm. She perceived in them a shared, subtle pain, a common yearning for a place where they could flourish, far from the shadows of familial neglect. From this keen observation, the idea was born, initially a whisper that soon swelled into a chorus within her spirit, to create a refuge, a sanctuary for marginalized souls. It would be more than just a house. It would be a beacon of welcome, a testament that dignity has no expiration date. The project, christened in her heart as Casa Esperanza, House of Hope, began to take shape in her thoughts, detail by meticulous detail, like intricate embroidery. Each conversation with fellow residents, each shared memory and aspiration, solidified this conviction. The construction of this new home would, in essence, be the physical manifestation of her own resurrection, a monument to human resilience. The moment of reunion between mother and son was inevitable, charged with a tension that could be cut with a knife. Marcos, his body stooped and his gaze dejected, finally found her. The scene was not one of explosive confrontation, but of a stillness heavy with unspoken meaning. He approached, his pride shattered into 1,000 pieces, his voice choked with guilt. His words of apology, though sincere, seemed hollow in the face of the chasm that had opened between them. It was an acknowledgement of his failing, a plea for redemption hanging in the air. Clara, in turn, observed him with an unshakable serenity, devoid of resentment but imbued with a resolve that stemmed from her newfound inner strength. There was no triumph in her gaze, merely a profound understanding of the journey they had both undertaken. That moment was not about retribution, nor about reopening old wounds. It was about reconstruction, about redefining what it meant to be a dignified human being. She sought not recompense, but the affirmation of her own integrity, and in doing so, offered Marcos the only thing that could liberate him, the chance to confront himself. And there, at the apex of their encounter, Clara extended her hand, not for an embrace, nor for an immediate gesture of forgiveness, but to present him with a blank sheet of paper. It was not a punishment, but a potent metaphor. The untouched surface symbolized the absence of a past that could be rewritten, yet the presence of a future yet to be constructed. She uttered no words of condemnation, but rather counsel that resonated with the wisdom of one who had walked through fire. Fill this with something worthy. It was an invitation to self-reflection, a challenge for him to transform his own ruin into a new foundation, not for her but for himself. That seemingly simple piece of paper carried the weight of a lifetime of lessons, a call to responsibility and the rediscovery of purpose. The realization of Casa Esperanza involved navigating a bureaucratic labyrinth, where each permit and each signature demanded an extra dose of patience. The task of transforming a concept into a tangible reality unfolded through countless details, from selecting a suitable location that offered accessibility and tranquility, to orchestrating renovations that respected the specific needs of future residents. It was a vast undertaking, testing not only leadership capabilities but also faith in the initiative itself. However, beyond the challenges of launching her new venture, Clara carried the subtle imprints of her journey. Her newfound freedom was not unaccompanied by a peculiar stillness, an echo of the solitude that had shaped her. She had indeed broken free from constraints, but the price of this emancipation was a more profound introspection, a realization that certain emotional wounds, though not bleeding, left invisible scars. This new chapter of her life, imbued with a renewed sense of purpose, also confronted her with the vastness of her own existence, now stripped of the conventions and expectations that had once defined her. The experience of being a burden, of being overlooked, had forged in her a singular resilience, but also a perpetual vigilance against complacency. In contrast, Marcos, with the blank page in his hands, confronted a challenge of existential proportions. Vivian's absence, as she dissolved into her own pursuit of convenience, and the loss of their material home were merely the tip of the iceberg. The true desolation resided in the internal void, in the pressing need to redefine his own identity. That piece of paper was not a punishment, but a relentless mirror, reflecting the absence of a purpose not dictated by consumption or the approval of others. He found himself compelled to confront the fragility of his own moral compass, to recognize that dignity was not an inherent right, but a daily achievement, forged in adversity and self-honesty. Marcos's journey, therefore, was a slow and agonizing walk back, not to a physical place, but to a state of wholeness. The initial steps were the most arduous, fraught with a reluctance to embrace his own vulnerability. Seeking employment, accepting menial tasks he once disdained, confronting the pitying or scornful gazes of former acquaintances. Each of these actions was an exercise in humility. He wasn't merely rebuilding a life. He was dismantling the fallacious premises upon which he had constructed it. This traversal, devoid of shortcuts, demanded a persistence he scarcely knew he possessed, an ability to rise after each fall, propelled by his mother's silent injunction. Furthermore, Casa Esperanza began to flourish, not merely as a physical structure, but as a living organism nurtured by the interdependence of its residents. Dona Zulema, with her knitting artistry, wove not only yarn but threads of affection, imparting lessons in patience and the beauty of manual labor. SCU Orlando shared his stories, transforming the dining table into a stage for memories and learning, while Beatriz, with her serene presence, offered a sanctuary of attentive listening and profound understanding. They were not simply discarded elders. They were architects of a novel kind of family, where vulnerability served as a bridge, not a barricade. In this manner, Clara's legacy was solidifying, transcending the mere provision of a roof over heads. She was cultivating fertile ground for the redefinition of old age, a space where time progressed not as a decline, but as an opportunity for new discoveries and connections. The persistence of challenges, both internal and external, only reinforced the conviction that true hope resides not in the absence of problems, but in the capacity to confront them with courage and compassion. Life, for Clara and for those around her at Casa Esperanza, continued to be a complex tapestry, woven with threads of joy and sorrow, of accomplishments and ongoing struggles, but always with the promise of a tomorrow yet to be built. The construction of Casa Esperanza, a project that had previously existed only within the outlines of Clara's imagination, now stood with undeniable solidity, each brick laid, each tile affixed, bearing witness to a persistence that transcended mere physical exertion. The walls, once simple structures, began to thrum with the promise of welcome, transforming into a palpable sanctuary for those who, like her, had experienced the poignant bitterness of abandonment. The construction phase, while demanding, had proven to be a crucible where Clara's vision was refined, gaining ever sharper contours and an even more profound purpose. Meanwhile, Marcos's existence orbited an inner tempest, a sort of personal purgatory. The blank page, once an invitation to reinvention, had become an unsparing mirror, reflecting the desolate absence of a starting point. He wandered through a labyrinth of regret, each dead end echoing unspoken words, unmade gestures. Life, stripped of its former certainties, compelled him to confront a brutal truth. Dignity is not bought nor inherited. It is built, brick by brick, in the forge of humility. The pain of self-discovery was a double-edged sword, severing illusions while clearing a path toward sharper awareness. The inauguration of Casa Esperanza was not merely an event. It was a rite of passage, a vibrant testament to the human capacity for reframing pain. The air that day was charged with an almost tangible energy, a blend of relief and restrained exultation. Amidst the smiles and embraces of her new companions, Dona Zulema, whose eyes now radiated a serene joy, SCU Orlando, who shared anecdotes with renewed enthusiasm, and Beatriz, whose quietude had transformed into a comforting presence. Clara felt a completeness that had long been foreign to her. That meticulously designed space was the materialization of a collective dream, a manifesto against invisibility. However, the climax of that journey would unfold in an unexpected encounter, a convergence that could not be avoided. Marcos, driven by an urgency that tore through his chest, emerged at the entrance of Casa Esperanza. His figure, once imposing, now seemed diminished. His shoulders hunched under the weight of a guilt he finally allowed himself to feel. He carried no flowers, no gifts, only the stark truth of his own ruin. His eyes, once evasive, met Clara's, and in that gaze, without words, he poured out the entirety of his suffering, the silent confession of a son who had failed. That suspended instant, suspended in time, was the apex of their ordeal. For Clara, it represented an opportunity to confront the past without succumbing to bitterness. For Marcos, it was the final chance to purge his soul, to shed the arrogance that had blinded him. The dense atmosphere, laden with unspoken memories, was an emotional minefield. He anticipated a scream, a reprimand, perhaps even tears. But Clara remained impassive, her serenity an impenetrable barrier against any attempt at manipulation or desperation. She was no longer the fragile woman. She was the matriarch of a new era, forged in the fires of resilience. In a gesture that transcended superficial forgiveness, Clara did not offer an embrace. Instead, she extended her hand, not to receive, but to give. Resting in her palm was not the blank slate he had come to know, but a small metal pin, etched with a single word, dignity. It was a potent symbol, an enduring reminder that true restitution lay not in words, but in deeds, in the rebuilding of a character forged in adversity. That pin was not absolution, but a constant memento of the task before him, an invitation to fill the blank page of his own life with actions that honored the very essence of that word. That moment was catharsis. Upon receiving the brooch, Marcos felt the weight not of condemnation, but of immense responsibility. That small object was the elixir of his journey, the realization that true wealth lay not in possessions, but in regained integrity. He hadn't received a house back, but the key to building his own worth. Clara, in turn, felt final liberation, the certainty that her journey had culminated not in vengeance, but in a legacy of healing and renewal. Casa Esperanza was now more than a home. It was a beacon, illuminating the path for all those seeking a new beginning, a silent testament to the strength residing in compassion and the capacity to transform adversity into a new purpose. Clara, now a pivotal figure at the newly inaugurated Hope House, experienced a distinct quietude, a kind of peace that was not an absence of noise, but serenity forged through overcoming adversity. Her routine, once characterized by invisibility, had transformed into a mosaic of meaningful interactions. She observed life pulsing through the corridors, the gardens, the common areas where stories intertwined and genuine laughter echoed. The feeling of being a burden had been replaced by the clarity of her new purpose, a responsibility she embraced with newfound dignity. Nevertheless, the journey had left its mark, a heightened sensitivity to the suffering of others, a profound understanding of human fragility, and the awareness that resilience is a muscle strengthened by each trial, but never without its cost. Furthermore, the dynamic within the Casa Esperanza evolved beyond mere coexistence. Dona Zulema, with her tireless needles, not only created knitted pieces but also wove a network of emotional support, transforming each stitch into a bond of connection. Her life stories, replete with folk wisdom and subtle humor, became a balm for the most fragile souls, a reminder that accumulated experience is a treasure. SCU Orlando, in turn, with his passion for maps and riddles, organized daily sessions of intellectual exploration, unraveling mysteries of the past and stimulating the residents' minds, proving that curiosity does not age. Beatriz, with her quiet presence and deep gaze, offered a safe harbor for confidences. Her tacit empathy an invitation to shared vulnerability. The house was a living organism, where each resident contributed their essence, forging a new familial tapestry. In stark contrast, Marcos's life, removed from the comfort and recognition of his former days, was an arid field where the seed of humility began to germinate. The lesson bequeathed to him was not instant absolution, but a call to action, an invitation to fill the void with acts of genuine worth. He dedicated himself to tasks he would have previously considered insignificant, confronting each day the mirror of his own failings. Initial shame gave way to a growing determination. He understood that true reconstruction was not achieved through grand gestures, but in the consistency of small ones, in the honesty of each effort, and in the ability to face oneself without pretense. Each day, he shed old illusions, realizing that the weight of a name or a fortune is infinitesimal compared to the lightness of a clear conscience. Beyond this, Casa Esperanza began to radiate its influence into the surrounding community. Volunteers, moved by the place's mission, offered their time and skills, forging a bridge between distinct generations and realities. Students from local schools visited the elderly for readings and conversations, discovering maps of wisdom and resilience etched onto the lines of their faces. This interaction fostered a valuable exchange, demystifying old age and planting seeds of compassion in young hearts. What began as a sanctuary for the forgotten was transforming into a hub for mutual learning and solidarity, redefining the role of the elderly in society. They began to knock on the door with donations, with time, with stories to share. Young students appeared to listen to the elderly, to learn from their experiences, and, without realizing it, to transform themselves. Workshops in writing, art, and music began to take shape, organized by residents and visitors. That space, born of abandonment and pain, was blossoming like a garden of dignity, where each life was nurtured with care, listening, and recognition. Clara watched it all with tear-filled eyes, feeling that, for the first time in many years, her life's harvest was not invisible. It was celebrated. The sweetest fruits, however, were unexpected. A letter. It arrived shyly folded, with no sender. Clara recognized the handwriting even before opening it. It was from Marcos. He wasn't writing to ask for anything. He was writing to share. He recounted difficult days, humble jobs, small victories. The smile of a child he helped, the gesture of a colleague who trusted him, the pride of receiving his first honest paycheck. And at the end, in shaky letters, he wrote, "Today, for the first time, I slept in peace, because I realized that being worthy is harder and more beautiful than being successful." Clara read it and, for the first time since their separation, she cried. But it wasn't sadness. They were tears of closure, of liberation. She understood, then and there, that her son had finally begun his own journey, not out of obligation, but out of desire. It was a slow, silent redemption, built with the same bricks she herself had used to build her new life. Courage, self-love, and faith in tomorrow. She no longer needed to worry about what she could have done for him. She had done what was necessary, shown him a mirror. Over time, Casa Esperanza gained notoriety. Local television programs began to feature it. Clara was interviewed on the radio, invited to speak. Her story touched people because it spoke of something everyone fears, being forgotten. And it showed, at the same time, that it is possible to be reborn even when everyone counts us out. She was becoming, unintentionally, a symbol of a broader movement, of valuing the elderly, of reinvention, of mature female power. And then came the day she walked through the corridors of the place she had created and saw something different. Unburdened joy, people playing cards, laughing heartily, sharing stories with pride. She paused before the garden, where a new tree had been planted, a plaque affixed to its base. For Clara Mendoza, who made bloom that which many deemed barren. There, she understood this was her inheritance. Not possessions, not the sold house, but the good sown in the hearts of others. Shortly thereafter, a new letter arrived. It was from Marcos once more, but this time it was accompanied by an invitation. He was about to embark on a project with underprivileged youth, a repair and woodworking workshop, inspired by the stories he had heard from his grandfather. He wanted to create a space where mistakes weren't tattoos, but bridges. You taught me that all wood, even the most worn, can be repurposed. I want to teach that to them as you taught me. Clara smiled. A newfound peace settled in her heart. She knew her mission would continue, even after her eventual departure. For her legacy wasn't her name, nor her face, but the actions, the seeds she had planted. Hope, once ignited, does not extinguish, passes from hand to hand like a sacred flame. And on a calm morning, as the first rays of sun streamed through the window of Casa Esperanza, Clara looked up at the sky and whispered to herself, "Thank you for everything, Ernesto, for loving me even after you were gone, for trusting that I would know what to do." And with a light heart, she continued walking, not toward an end, but toward the next chapter of a life that finally was full because it was truly hers.